Picture a packed courtroom where the judge slams the gavel and the defendant takes the stand, only to let out a confused oink. For centuries, humans genuinely believed the best way to handle misbehaving livestock or thieving rodents was to drag them through the formal justice system. Today, we are exposing 50 of the most absurd and hilarious times animals were actually put on trial and punished. You are about to seriously question the collective sanity of our ancestors. 1. In 1386, the French town of Falaise held a trial that would make any modern lawyer's head spin. A pig was officially arrested for a serious disturbance, but instead of a quick trip to the butcher, authorities insisted on a full legal defense. Once found guilty in a packed courtroom, the town decided the animal needed to face a public consequence. The most mind-blowing detail? They actually dressed the pig in a custom-tailored human outfit, complete with a waistcoat and breeches, to ensure the legal proceedings looked official. It is a testament to the absolute commitment our ancestors had to bureaucratic theater. 2. Fast forward to 1522 in autumn France, where a massive mob of rats was summoned to court for destroying the local barley crops. When the furry defendants failed to show up, their court-appointed lawyer, Bartholomew Chassenet, pulled off a legal masterclass. He argued that the rats couldn't safely make it to the courthouse because the village cats were terrorizing the streets. He successfully demanded that townspeople bind their cats so his clients could travel safely. The town refused, the trial was indefinitely postponed, and Chassenet became a legal legend for essentially outsmarting a judge on behalf of rodents. 3. The Swiss city of Basel took things to an entirely different level of paranoia in 1474. A local rooster was dramatically arrested and charged with the unnatural, heinous crime of laying an egg. In the 15th century, people genuinely believed a rooster's egg would hatch a mythical beast called a cockatrice. The defense argued the bird couldn't help its bodily functions, but the prosecution insisted it was the work of pure sorcery. The rooster was found guilty and burned at the stake alongside its offensive egg. How would you even begin to defend a chicken against witchcraft charges? 4. Imagine suing bugs for ruining your wine. In 1587, the winemakers of St. Julian were absolutely fed up with weevils decimating their precious vineyards. They took the insects to court, sparking a legal battle that dragged on for nearly 8 months. The insects' defense attorney argued that God created the bugs and gave them the right to eat plants. The judge, completely torn by this theological dilemma, actually ordered the town to set aside a dedicated plot of land exclusively for the weevils to live on. The bugs, unsurprisingly, ignored the court order and kept eating the premium grapes. 5. It turns out marine life wasn't safe from the long arm of the law either. In the late 16th century, fishermen in Marseille grew exhausted by local dolphins getting tangled in their expensive fishing nets and tearing them to shreds. Instead of inventing better nets, they took the dolphins to court. A judge formally ordered the sea creatures to keep their distance from the fishing zones. We can only assume the bailiff stood on the beach shouting the verdict into the ocean. It really makes you appreciate the sheer, unadulterated confidence of historical legal professionals. 6. When you have a severe pest problem, who do you call? In 1451, the people of Lausanne asked their local bishop to handle an infestation of leeches in the town's water supply. A few select leeches were captured, brought into the courtroom, and formally ordered to leave the area within 3 days. When the bloodsuckers stubbornly refused to pack their tiny, non-existent bags, the bishop brought out the big guns and officially excommunicated the leeches from the church. Surprisingly, removing the leeches' spiritual privileges did absolutely nothing to improve the local water quality. 7. Even the Salem witch trials of 1692 weren't limited to human drama. An innocent dog actually found itself caught in the legal crossfire. A local girl claimed a neighborhood canine was giving her a supernatural evil eye, acting as a secret accomplice for a suspected witch. In an era where logic had vanished, the confused animal was formally arrested, put on trial, and convicted of being a familiar to the dark arts. The community decided the dog was a threat and carried out a formal sentence. Would you feel safe today if your golden retriever could be sued for looking at a neighbor the wrong way? 8. Over in Brazil, during the early 18th century, a group of Franciscan monks filed a massive lawsuit against a colony of termites. The monks were furious that the insects were quietly devouring the wooden foundation of their monastery. But the termites had a surprisingly brilliant lawyer who argued his clients were simply following natural law and were actually far more industrious than the monks themselves. The judge agreed. He ruled in favor of the termites, ordering the monks to stop harassing the bugs and to leave them in peace. Imagine losing a property dispute to an insect. 9. A French village experienced a highly unusual case of justice in 1750 involving a female donkey named Basso. She was caught participating in a rather scandalous and illegal act with a local man. Both were arrested and put on trial for their unnatural crimes. However, the townspeople rallied behind Basso. They submitted a signed petition to the court declaring she was a deeply virtuous and well-behaved donkey who was clearly a victim of circumstance. The judge was so moved by her stellar character references that he acquitted the donkey and executed the man. Talk about pretty privilege. 10. In 1916, a small Tennessee town became the site of a tragic and surreal legal standoff involving a circus elephant named Mary. After a chaotic incident during a parade, the community demanded immediate justice through a formal trial. Instead of using modern animal control, officials staged a public hearing and sentenced the massive creature to a physical penalty. Because of her size, they utilized a massive industrial railroad crane to carry out the court's order in front of thousands of spectators. It remains a chilling reminder of how easily public hysteria can turn a legal system into a truly bizarre and irrational spectacle. 11. During the Napoleonic Wars, the residents of Hartlepool, England, encountered a shipwrecked monkey dressed in a miniature military uniform. Having never actually seen a French person before, the locals became convinced the chattering animal was a French spy. They subjected the confused primate to a rigorous interrogation on the beach. Since the monkey refused to answer their questions in English and instead responded with suspicious screeching, they officially found him guilty of espionage. It is a legendary example of wartime paranoia reaching absolute fever pitch. 12. In 1519, the town of Stelvio sued a massive colony of moles for burrowing under their agricultural fields. The trial was surprisingly civil, and the judge actually showed some bizarre legal compassion. He formally ordered the moles to vacate the region, but issued a special safe conduct passport for the pregnant and elderly moles, giving them an extra 14 days to pack up their belongings. How exactly does a mole carry a legal passport without any pockets? It is a logistical nightmare we will never solve. 13. Spanish farmers in the 17th century had a highly unique strategy for dealing with devastating locust plagues. They sued them. The town would catch a handful of the insects, bring them before a judge, and formally read them their legal rights. If the locusts refused to leave the crops, they were officially excommunicated from the church. Local priests would march into the fields, loudly denouncing the bug's spiritual standing. Sadly, locusts are notoriously terrible at practicing any form of organized religion. 14. Moving away from insects, an Austrian town in the early 20th century actually arrested a dog for biting a local politician. Instead of a severe punishment, the judge decided the animal just needed some time to think about its actions. The dog was literally sentenced to serve 1 year in the local human prison. He was placed in a cell, fed daily rations, and treated like an inmate. Do you think his cellmates respected him? Or were they just completely jealous he got to sleep all day? It is the ultimate timeout. 15. Not all medieval pig trials ended in tragedy. In a highly unusual case from 16th century France, a pig wandered into a church during Sunday service and ate the Holy Communion bread. The congregation was absolutely scandalized. The pig was immediately arrested and put on trial for sacrilege. However, the judge mercifully ruled that because the pig lacked a soul, it couldn't fully understand the crime. Instead of a harsh physical sentence, the animal was simply excommunicated and permanently banned from the church. 16. Back in 1405, a sheep in Burgundy, France, was formally arrested for a minor local scuffle that spiraled out of control. The animal was brought before a high-ranking judge, assigned a professional defense attorney, and actually waited in a human holding cell for the duration of the trial. Numerous witnesses were called to testify about the sheep's general character and past behavior in the pasture. Ultimately, the judge ruled the sheep was merely a first-time offender and released it with a formal, stern warning. It truly makes you wonder how a sheep even processes a legal warning. Does it just nod politely and go back to eating grass? 17. During the 18th century, a mischievous cow in a European village developed a terrible habit of breaking through a neighbor's fence to eat their premium cabbage. The angry neighbor bypassed the farmer and sued the cow directly. The court found the bovine completely guilty of trespassing and property damage. The judge ordered the cow to wear a remarkably loud, incredibly annoying wooden bell around its neck as a badge of shame. Public humiliation truly knows no species barrier whatsoever. 18. Let's visit the early days of America, where pests were still treated like unruly tenants. In 19th century folklore, unhappy farmers would literally write formal eviction notices to the rats living in their barns. They would slip the written legal documents into the rat holes, politely but firmly asking the rodents to relocate to a neighbor's property. The letters often included directions. Would you be flattered or furious if your neighbor legally redirected their severe pest problem to your house? 19. In a truly absurd twist of Italian legal history, cheesemakers once brought a lawsuit against the very mites that help age their cheese. The microscopic bugs were getting a little too greedy and eating into the profits. The court held a serious hearing where lawyers fiercely debated the economic rights of microscopic organisms. The judge ruled that the mites were allowed to stay, but only if they strictly limited their consumption. Bureaucracy trying to regulate microscopic diets is the absolute peak of human arrogance. 20. English farmers in the 1500s declared all-out legal war on sparrows for eating their grain. The local council held a formal tribunal and declared the tiny birds to be outlaws of the state. Because they couldn't exactly arrest the birds and put them in handcuffs, the court issued a sternly worded legal warning demanding they leave the parish immediately. The town crier literally stood in the fields yelling the legal verdict at the sky. It was a bizarre, hilarious display of legally sanctioned bird shouting. 21. In 1545, wine growers in Saint-Julien dragged a massive swarm of caterpillars to court for devastating their vineyards. The legal battle was fiercely debated, but the defense attorney argued the bugs were simply exercising their God-given right to eat. The judge eventually issued a formal decree, sternly ordering the caterpillars to leave the premises immediately or face severe spiritual consequences. Unsurprisingly, the bugs ignored the paperwork. Imagine trying to serve a legal notice to a caterpillar. Where do you even put the stamp? 22. In 1457, a sow in Savigny, France, was charged with murder, but the real legal drama involved her 6 piglets. The piglets were found at the scene of the crime, stained with blood, and were indicted as accomplices. Their court-appointed lawyer argued brilliantly that the piglets were underage, impressionable, and had simply been led astray by their mother's bad example. The court actually bought it. The sow was executed, but the piglets were acquitted and released into the custody of a new owner. If your siblings committed a crime, would you expect to be charged as an accomplice just for being in the same room? 23. One of the most famous medieval justice stories involves the dog of Montargis. After a French courtier was murdered in the forest, his dog relentlessly attacked a specific man named Macaire every time he saw him. King Charles VI was so intrigued by the dog's persistence that he ordered a judicial duel, a trial by combat between the man and the dog. The man was given a stick. The dog was given an empty barrel to retreat into. The dog eventually won the fight, forcing a confession from the man. It remains the only time in history a dog has acted as both detective and executioner. 24. Modern legal systems aren't immune to this madness either. In 2008, a court in Macedonia convicted a bear of theft. The bear had been repeatedly raiding a beekeeper's hives to steal honey, singing along to the tune of "The Bare Necessities" while he did it. Okay, maybe not that last part. Since the bear was a protected species and had no owner, the court couldn't punish the animal directly. Instead, they ordered the state to pay the beekeeper for the damages. Effectively, the government was held liable for the criminal activities of a wild animal, proving that bureaucracy is the one trap no creature can escape. 25. Australia gave us a legal gem in 2013 involving Gary the goat. Gary was arrested by police for eating flowers outside the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney. The police actually issued a fine to the goat's owner for vandalism. The case went all the way to a local court, where a magistrate had to seriously evaluate whether a goat could have criminal intent. The judge threw the case out, ruling that Gary was not a person and therefore could not be fined, handing a major victory to hungry goats everywhere. 26. In 2015, a parrot named Harial was summoned to a police station in India. The bird's owner accused his stepson of training the parrot to hurl abusive obscenities at his stepmother every time she entered the room. The police, taking this very seriously, decided to test the bird's vocabulary in custody. However, under the pressure of the interrogation room, the parrot remained completely silent. The case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. If your pet started repeating everything you say at home, would you be safe or would you be in immediate legal trouble? 27. A prison in Brazil experienced a serious security breach in 2013, and the culprit was a white cat. Guards noticed the feline entering and exiting the main gate frequently. Upon detaining the suspect, they discovered the cat had a bag tapped to its belly containing drill bits, files, and a mobile phone. The cat was arrested and held in a cage, while the prison board demanded to know which inmate had trained the animal. The cat, being a true professional, never snitched on its accomplices and was eventually released to a local animal shelter for rehabilitation. 28. Borders mean nothing to animals, but they mean everything to Border Patrol. In 2011, a monkey crossed the border from India into the Punjab province of Pakistan. The local authorities arrested the monkey for trespassing on state land without a visa. The animal was placed in a zoo, which the officials essentially treated as a prisoner of war camp for the spy monkey. It highlights the absolute absurdity of applying geopolitical boundaries to creatures who just want to find a banana tree. 29. London in 1921 was captivated by the high-profile legal drama surrounding a local cat named Togo. The feline was accused of terminating a prize-winning canary, and the evidence was initially stacked against him, mostly because he was, well, a cat. However, Togo's owner hired a sharp defense team that argued the entire case was based on purely circumstantial evidence. They pointed out that any neighborhood stray could have been the culprit. The judge eventually agreed, citing reasonable doubt, and Togo was officially acquitted of all charges. He returned home to a life of napping, presumably with a very smug look on his face. 30. In 2015, Indian police detained a pigeon that they suspected was a Pakistani spy. The bird was found carrying a stamped message on its feathers and a small wire-like object. The authorities took the bird into custody, X-rayed it, and kept it under armed guard. Yes, a literal armed guard for a pigeon, while intelligence agencies investigated. It turned out to be a racing pigeon that had gotten lost, but for a few days, that bird was the most dangerous winged criminal on the subcontinent. 31. In 1924, a black Labrador named Pep became the most famous inmate in Pennsylvania history. The press ran wild with a sensational story that Pep had been sentenced to life in prison without parole for the cold-blooded murder of the governor's beloved cat. He was even issued an official inmate number, C2559, and had a genuine mugshot taken, complete with a somber expression. The reality was far less dramatic. The governor had simply donated the dog to the prison to boost inmate morale, and the murder charge was a joke that got out of hand. But for decades, people genuinely believed a dog was serving hard time for a feline felony. 32. In 2015, German police responded to a hilarious emergency call. A woman was being relentlessly stalked down the street. The prime suspect? A highly persistent baby red squirrel. Officers arrived, formally arrested the tiny furry stalker, and brought him to the station for booking. It turned out the squirrel wasn't a criminal mastermind, just a confused orphan looking for a mother substitute. Officers named him Carl Friedrich, officially dropped the stalking charges, and sentenced him to a cozy rehabilitation center. Have you ever been intimidated by a squirrel? 33. A case in Nigeria in 2009 blurred the lines between law enforcement and supernatural folklore. Police arrested a goat on suspicion of attempted armed robbery. Yes, you heard that correctly. Vigilantes had been chasing two human thieves, and when one escaped, they found a goat standing in his place. They handed the animal over to the police, claiming the thief had used black magic to shapeshift into a farm animal to evade capture. The police actually held the goat in custody until the investigation concluded. It brings a whole new meaning to the term scapegoat. 34. In 2019, a French rooster named Maurice found himself at the center of a bitter legal battle that gripped the nation. His crime? Being a rooster. Neighbors who had bought a vacation home nearby sued Maurice's owner because the bird's early morning crowing disrupted their sleep. The case turned into a symbolic war between rural traditions and city-dwelling vacationers. The judge ultimately ruled in Maurice's favor, declaring that the countryside has noises and people just need to deal with it. Maurice became a national hero for the right to be loud. 35. The modern era brought us the strangest copyright battle in history, the monkey selfie case. In 2011, a macaque named Naruto snatched a photographer's camera and took a perfect grinning selfie. PETA later sued on the monkey's behalf, arguing that since Naruto pressed the button, he owned the copyright to the image, not the human photographer. The case dragged through the US court system for years, debating whether a monkey can legally own intellectual property. The court eventually ruled that animals cannot hold copyrights, saving us from a future where monkeys sue for royalties. 36. Bureaucracy is blind, and sometimes it is also incredibly stupid. In 2011, a resident of Boston named Sal Esposito received a formal summons for jury duty. The problem? Sal was a domestic cat. His owners had listed him on the census as a joke under pets. But the automated jury selection system didn't care about species. When the owners tried to file for an exemption, the court initially rejected it, insisting Sal had to appear. They eventually realized the error, but for a moment, a cat was legally required to judge the fate of a human defendant. 37. German engineering is precise, and apparently so are their traffic cameras. In 2019, a speed camera in the town of Bocholt flashed a speeding violator going 45 km/h in a 30 km/h zone. When police reviewed the footage to issue the ticket, they discovered the perpetrator was a pigeon flying at a low altitude. The police department released a hilarious statement saying the bird was too fast, but likely wouldn't be able to pay the €25 fine. It is the only time a bird has been caught red-handed, or red-winged, breaking traffic laws. 38. A donkey in the Mexican state of Chiapas found himself behind bars in 2008 for assault and battery. The animal, nicknamed Blackie, bit a man on the chest and kicked another in the leg. Police arrived at the scene, arrested the donkey, and locked him in the local drunk tank, usually reserved for rowdy humans. The donkey was held for 3 days until his owner agreed to pay the victim's medical bills and the police administrative fees. It proves that in some places, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime, even if you have hooves. 39. In 2015, a Michigan woman named Glenna Durham was accused of murdering her husband, and the only witness was the family's African gray parrot, Bud. After the incident, the bird began repeating a chilling conversation in 2 different voices, ending with a scream of, "Don't shoot." The prosecutor seriously considered using the parrot's mimicry as evidence in the murder trial. While the bird didn't take the stand, the debate raised a fascinating legal question. If a parrot repeats a murder confession, is it admissible in court, or is it just hearsay? 40. The River Cam in England was terrorized for years by a swan nicknamed Asbo, a British slang term for antisocial behavior order. This bird was a genuine menace, repeatedly attacking rowers and capsizing small boats with aggressive precision. Since all swans in the UK are technically property of the Crown, you can't just hurt them. The authorities finally had to intervene legally. They didn't jail him, but they sentenced him to exile, relocating him to a sanctuary 60 miles away to protect the public. He was essentially deported for being a jerk. 41. In 1488, the citizens of Oudham were deeply annoyed by a slow-moving invasion of snails. The slimy trespassers were ruining the local gardens, so the town initiated a formal lawsuit. The legal proceedings dragged on for months, which is quite fitting for snails. Ultimately, the judge ordered the snails to participate in a religious procession to cleanse them of their trespassing sins. If they failed to attend, they would be cursed. Shockingly, the snails did not show up for the mandatory church service. 42. In 1894, a dog in Ohio was formally sued for nuisance by an incredibly frustrated neighbor who claimed the canine's persistent barking was a targeted form of psychological harassment. The judge didn't just order a standard fine for the owner. He sentenced the dog itself to serve 3 full days in the local town jail to reflect on its vocal choices. The jailer reportedly gave the dog a tiny bed and 3 square meals a day, treating it like any other inmate. 43. During the late 14th century, a judge in Switzerland presided over a truly bizarre case involving a massive, relentless swarm of common houseflies. The local townspeople were so thoroughly annoyed by the buzzing insects that they demanded a formal legal eviction. The judge, taking his administrative duties very seriously, actually appointed a legal advocate for the flies. The lawyer argued brilliantly that the flies were essential to the local ecosystem and possessed a natural right to exist where they pleased. The judge eventually ruled in favor of the flies, making it legally impossible to swat them without a valid, documented reason. 44. An Egyptian cobra once became a high-profile fugitive from justice in 2011 after making a daring escape from its enclosure at the Bronx Zoo. While the local police didn't literally put the snake in tiny handcuffs, they treated the entire situation like a high-stakes, citywide manhunt. The snake even gained a massive Twitter following during its time on the run, frequently mocking the authorities' inability to catch it with witty, anonymous posts. When finally apprehended, the suspect was returned to its enclosure under significantly increased security protocols. It remains the only time a reptile has successfully trolled a major metropolitan police department for a week straight. 45. Medieval law was absolutely obsessed with the concept of fairness, even when it came to unruly livestock. In 1314, a bull in a small French village was taken to court after it accidentally knocked over a local merchant and ruined his wares. The trial was incredibly formal, involving several high-ranking officials and a full jury of local citizens. After listening to hours of detailed testimony about the bull's general temperament, the judge decided the animal wasn't actually malicious, just remarkably clumsy. Instead of a harsh physical penalty, the bull's owner had to pay a steep fine, and the bull was permanently banned from the town market for a year. 46. A seafood restaurant in China once faced a very strange legal situation when a large crab managed to escape from a high-tech supermarket vending machine. The crab was spotted wandering the busy city streets by a passerby, who jokingly called the local police to report a runaway. Surprisingly, the officers actually arrived on the scene, detained the crab, and held it at the station until they could eventually track down its rightful owner. They even took viral photos of the crab sitting at a tiny interrogation table with a lamp pointed at it. It proves that regardless of the country, some police officers have a truly fantastic and slightly ridiculous sense of humor. 47. In 1819, a massive circus elephant in Venice was accused of significant property damage after it broke through a historic stone wall to reach a tempting fruit stand. The local council didn't just ask for simple repairs. They held a formal public hearing to determine if the elephant had acted with malice aforethought. The defense argued that the elephant was simply driven by basic hunger and didn't understand the complexities of Italian stone masonry. The elephant was eventually pardoned on the strict condition that it never entered the historic city center again. It remains the only time an elephant was legally banned from an entire Italian city. 48. South Africa once saw a horse formally arrested for a serious traffic violation during the mid-1990s. The horse had wandered onto a busy highway during rush hour, causing a massive, multi-mile traffic jam that lasted for hours. Police didn't just lead the horse away to a field. They formally took it to the local police impound lot and issued a detailed citation to the owner. The horse was forced to stay in the impound facility for several days until the heavy fine was finally paid in full. Imagine telling your boss you're late for work because a horse is currently in police custody for reckless walking on the freeway. 49. A rooster in a small European village was sued by an angry neighbor in the late 19th century because its morning crowing was considered disturbingly loud. The judge, rather than simply banning the bird, ordered a formal sound test to be conducted right in the middle of the courtroom. The rooster, obviously confused by the legal surroundings, stubbornly refused to crow on command for 3 straight hours despite everyone's best efforts. The judge was forced to dismiss the case due to a total lack of evidence, proving that even a bird knows exactly when to keep its mouth shut in front of the authorities. Okay, we have analyzed 49 fascinating points of animal legal history, and there is just one final entry left on our list. But before we reveal number 50, it is time for our final verdict. In our humble opinion, the award for the most mind-blowing and incredible rule from today's list goes to the French pig from our very first point. Simply because the sheer mental image of a pig in a custom-tailored human waistcoat standing before a judge in a professional courtroom is the absolute peak of human absurdity. It represents a time when we tried to project our complex morality onto creatures that just wanted a snack. Do you agree with our choice, or did another specific point earn your respect? Let us know in the comments section below. Now, it is time for our final number. 50. In 1479, the city of Lausanne, Switzerland, witnessed the most intense and dramatic legal showdown in history. The people versus the caterpillars. These insects were destroying the local crops at an alarming rate, so the court issued a formal summons for them to appear within 3 days. A professional lawyer was appointed to defend the caterpillars, and he argued brilliantly that they were simply hungry travelers following their biological nature. The judge eventually excommunicated the insects from the church and banished them from the territory under threat of spiritual punishment. It remains the ultimate example of human beings trying to use complex legal paperwork to solve a purely biological problem. From legal chickens to criminal cats, history proves that we have always been obsessed with bringing order to the natural world, even if it makes us look completely ridiculous. It's wild to think that people once spent months arguing with bugs or putting pigs in suits. Now, for the big question, if your pet were put on trial today, what would be their crime? If you enjoyed this journey through legal madness, hit that like button and subscribe for more strange history.